Hey everyone, I'm Casey Martin from Wine Country Mica Powders and Wine Country Woodworks, and today I'm going to be making a video explaining the 5 best tips that I've learned when it comes to resin casting mica powder. Now, using mica powder does not necessarily, of course, have to be for resin. A lot of these tips are going to pertain to resin, but they're also useful whether you're using it for soap making, using it in paint, any number of the type of applications mica powder can be used for. So this should be a really useful video for all of you people out there who are using mica powder, curious about it, are experienced or inexperienced. There should definitely be some tips in here for everyone, so let's dive right in. So the first tip I wanted to talk about is about the amount of mica powder that should be used, whether you're resin casting or using it in paint, soap, all of the things that I mentioned earlier, right? It can be used for a bunch of different things. That is one of the most frequent questions I see myself get asked, as well as other experienced resin casters and people who have been doing it for years, is how much mica powder do I use? And the answer, although it's not a great one, but it's definitely why I wanted to bring it up, is it depends. It completely depends on what type of look you are going for. If you add a bunch of mica powder, you can get an opaque look with most mica powders. Granted, there are some mica powders or some glitters that no matter how much you add, for instance, macro pearl from a lot of manufacturers, including myself, no matter if you dump in the whole container or not, it's gonna be really tough to make a completely opaque look. You're probably still gonna get some light shining in. If you're making something as thin as a pen in the final turned product, you will probably see through it. Now, if you're using more standard colors like a blue or a red, a gold, things like that, like the majority of my powders, for instance, at Wine Country Mica Powder, if you add a lot of it, you can get an opaque look. Also, if you add, of those particular powders that can get an opaque look, if you add just a little bit, you can also get a really cool transparent look that you are not able to get to the same effect with just a little bit of blue dye. And I'll give you an example. If you use a little bit of blue dye, for instance, I'll use a little bit of Alumilite blue dye if I'm trying to make an ocean look, it'll look awesome. But of course there will be no pearlescent effects, nothing like that. It'll just be a little tinge of blue to the resin. If I want the same look, but I use a little bit of, for instance, my ocean blue mica powder, I'll get that same blue tint, but there will be a hint of pearlescent sparkle throughout it, right? So as I said, to kind of sum it all up, it's not the best, most clear answer of it depends, right? But it truly does. The amount of mica powder is completely subjective to the application you are trying to do and what your desired effect is. If you want something opaque, add a lot. If you want something transparent, add a little, or you can meet in between, and the possibilities are endless. Moving on to the second topic, which is going to be a little bit more of a quick one. I think a lot of experienced resin casters and people who use mica powder may already know this and have seen it done. For instance, I do it myself a lot, but maybe some people don't know and don't know all the possibilities, and that is mixing mica powder with dyes. So for instance, if I want to make sure that I have a nice opaque color, for instance, I've been using the example blue, let's use an example red. If I'm using my Pinot Red mica powder and I want to be 100% sure that people aren't going to have to paint the tubes if they're turning a pen, or they're using, whatever type of application, and they want to make sure that it's nice and opaque, light's not going to shine through, I'll add some Alumilite red dye. And right, this could be for if it's soap, if you're using, food safe dye or whatever goes in the soap. I'm not too experienced with it, but right, any type of application mica powder is being used for. If you're doing a type of painting or something like that, you can use more of an opaque dye with the mica powder. Granted, you can't go completely opaque, because if you want to see some of the sparkles of the mica powder, light has to get through, right? It has to refract off of the powder and show those sparkles. That's how you're going to see it. But with a lot of, in particular, resin casting dyes, like the Alumilite dyes that I use, all of them besides the white dye can be augmented by mica powder, and you can get a really, really nice, deep, rich color with also some sparkle to it. The third tip that I wanted to mention has to do with color swirling mica powders. Now, a lot of people are not aware of this, or maybe I just don't see as many people do it as possible, because there is something to be said about using nice opaque, very deep and saturated colors for color swirls, because you'll get more of a contrast between them. However, you can absolutely do color swirls with mica powders. For instance, if you wanted to, make a USA patriotic blink with red, white, and blue, you could use a red powder, a blue powder, and a white powder. And as I was mentioning earlier, add a lot of it so you can get an opaque color for each of them. And then you would just follow the same procedure of color swirling resin as you would for any other application, or for soap, for instance, or paint, right? Any other application, and I'm of course experienced with resin, so I know with resin, to get the most vibrant colors, you want to wait until the temperature gets higher and it becomes a little more thick. And that's when you do your color swirls. The same exact thing can be done for mica powder, and I think a lot of people don't realize it. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention on the same topic when it comes to mixing different colors of mica powders is kind of the inverse of color swirling, which is bleeding the colors together. Mica powder offers a fantastic difference between traditional dyes that you really don't get the opportunity to use when you're using normal dyes. And what that is when you're using, for instance, a red and a blue dye, like Alumilite red, Alumilite blue, and you're mixing 2 cups of resin at the same time before they've gotten warm or anything like that, and you kind of dump them in together fast, you're gonna get some bleeding in the middle that's gonna look purple. If you do the same exact thing with a red and a blue mica powder, you're going to have a little bit less bleeding. And where you do have the bleeding is going to look less of purple. It's going to look more of like a nebula or galaxy, if you will, of different sparkles of blue and different sparkles of red, rather than a solid purple color like you would get with the dye example I was mentioning. You're still gonna get some bleeding, you're still gonna have some of that if you mix really fast and you don't wait for it to get thicker, and you just kind of dump them together really fast. However, I wanted to mention that 1, you can do the color swirls, you absolutely can, and then 2, it offers some really unique, fun applications for mixing them together that I did not know, for a long time using mica powder, and I wanted to share that as a fun tip. The 4th tip, which I've already alluded to quite a bit in this video, is that mica powder can be used in any type of liquid medium. So for instance, I, of course, am very familiar with Alumilite resin. I've mentioned it a lot in this video, but it can be used for any type of epoxy, any other type of polyurethane resin. As I mentioned, soap earlier in the video can be used for that. It can be used for paint. I mean, the possibilities are endless, right? For instance, a lot of people don't realize, for instance, mica powder is used in a lot of automotive paint, right? If you think about like the candy paint cars, or you look at just like normal painted cars that have a little sparkle, that's mica powder that's doing it. So the possibilities really are endless. You don't have to be a resin caster yourself. If you already are, or a different type of artist, you can think about all the fun applications for it as well. It does not have to be just resin. That's of course where my experience lies, and I know a lot of you watching probably come from, potentially if you're subscribers of mine or have been following the channel. But as I said, it can be used for a ton of different applications, and that's what makes it so fun. The 5th and final tip has to do, and this is a very important one in my opinion, one of the most useful ones out of this 5, is that different mica powders or glitters or glow-in-the-dark powders, all of these different powders have different densities. Now, my buddy Zach Higgins just made a live stream, and I'm sure his video is going to be up as a replay somewhat soon, experimenting with some of the Wine Country mica powders, mixing some of the glow-in-the-dark powders with some of the other color shift powders and some of the normal mica powders. And it was a perfect example of how you have to be careful with densities, and he talks a lot about it on the show. And what I mean by that is, the tip is that you need to pay attention if you're mixing multiple colors of different powders, that they are about the same weight or density if you want them not to sink to the bottom. The example I mentioned with Zach is, for instance, since he was using glow-in-the-dark powders and they are very, very heavy, and he was mixing them with some macro color shift powders and some interference powders that were more normal. The macros, are really light, and I think he also had some glitters, which are also very light, that the glow-in-the-dark is going to want to shift to the bottom and sink because it has a higher density, whereas the other ones are gonna wanna stay on the top. So a tip that you can use if you're resin casting, for instance, is to wait as long as you can till the temperature gets as high as possible and the resin gets as thick as possible before you mix them in. And then you're gonna get smallest amount of time until it starts curing and gets really, really hard for any density effects to be applied. So all in all, if you are mixing a higher density, a heavier type of powder, and you'll know it too, right? For instance, if you're holding 2 jars of one of my glow-in-the-dark powders and another one of like Pinot Red, for instance, it's literally 3 times heavier. You're gonna feel it in your hand. So the big tip is just basically, if you are going to be mixing multiple colors, pay attention to the densities and keep that in mind. For instance, if you're okay with a denser one like a glow-in-the-dark powder sinking to the bottom if you are not very careful. And you can get around it too. It's hard, but you can. For instance, Zach did a pretty good job. They did sink to the bottom a little bit in that video. And I'll have the video in the video description below once that's live. But that's about it for the 5 tips. I know this video got a lot longer than I wanted it to, but I think there's a lot of valuable information in here. I think that this hopefully was able to help some of you experienced resin casters out there or inexperienced resin casters, and also maybe just some other artists as well that don't even resin cast themselves, maybe soap makers or painters or whatever, right? The possibilities are endless for mica powder. So hopefully it was able to help some of you out as well. If you're interested in my mica powder line, the Wine Country Mica, which you can't see behind me, it's right underneath the shot, unfortunately. But if you're interested in any of those, it's winecountrymica.com. The link is in the top corner of the screen with the eye, and also in the video description as well. You can go check them out. I have a bundle if you want to get all 30 of them, or also, of course, if you just want to buy them individually, you can. I love them. Gotten great feedback so far from a lot of the people, which is just so heartwarming and exciting, you know, having a lot of people in the community use them and like them. It's just so much fun for me. So definitely go check those out if you're interested. If not, no worries. Like the video if you liked it. If you didn't, again, no worries. Comment down below what you all thought. Any ideas if you think I should make another video with some other tips, because I of course tried to narrow it down to the 5 best ones that I thought were the most valuable to mention, but I definitely have some more if you all think that would be worth it. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and want to stick around and like the content. And as I mentioned, comment down below what you think. Let me know some future video ideas. I'm gonna be making 1 a week and trying to make as much content as possible. So thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.